The good news is the Guardians have the best home record in the American League in 2024, and they've got 3 straight home games to keep that going. The bad news is the Yankees had the best road record in all of Major League Baseball in 2024. Going to be a big week.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I say it's not a big week. ALCS, those come all the time, right? It's this it's
just like Aaron Judge's homer wasn't big, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
On today's Lockdown Guardians, we'll talk about where things sit after an off day between games 2 and 3. We'll kind of look back at the first 2 games of the series, see where the Guardians' mindset sits, where our mindset sits, and how things have gone so far. So we'll revisit that a little bit. We're going to talk about the Alex Cobb trade because his season, maybe his career, definitely his Guardians career is probably over. So we'll talk about that, and then we will preview Game 3.
Maybe I will talk really slow since this is everyone's favorite, but I'm kidding. I'm Jeff Ellis. I used to write at Scotland 24/7 nationally as a prospect and draft analyst. Then I came here to Locked On. I was one of the opening salvo, if you were, of podcasters they brought on to talk about baseball. And that's about it.
That's all. Yeah. I'm Justin Latta. I've written for so many different sports blogs out there in Cleveland. It's pronounced Lajoie, Guardians Baseball Insider, Burning River Baseball, too many to cite. Currently at the Morning Journal, the News Herald, as well as Prospects Live, covering baseball since 2007. And now here with you, Jeff, talking about where things stand for the Guardians heading into Game 3.
On 2 feet.
Yes, we're standing on 2 feet.
That's where everything stands. So what are they standing on? They're standing on 2 feet. I answered your question. Show's over. Thank you for watching. Go Guardians, go.
No, the Cats stand on 4 feet, right?
Yeah, but they don't play baseball for the Guardians, though. Maybe they should right now with some of the defensive plays that the team's making.
The cat answer to Airbud.
I don't know. Someone will make a joke about you can't motivate a cat enough to do an Airbud, but
that's fair.
When you look at where this team is, it's not ideal. Obviously. I mean, understatement at 0-2. The other way one can look at it is like they were in 2 competitive games, even though they really didn't play well. Like they had a lot of blown opportunities. It was sloppy. It was not the best of Guardians baseball we've seen all year. And yeah, they're down 0-2 as one would expect in those situations, but it's not like they got blown out. They managed to kind of keep the Yankees are not a perfect team as much as everyone's sitting there. I know, listen, I perused the comments a little. I'm taking a little bit of a break from some of the toxicity that occurs on the internet right now. So I apologize to some of our everydayers who like, hey, why isn't Jeff doing that? I'm taking a break for a bit. But the thing I'll say is like, you can't be too arrogant with the issues and with runners in scoring position. If you're the Yankees, like they haven't been, Aaron Judge has been, he had the home run, but he's been for everything we're saying about Jose, you could say about Aaron Judge so far in the postseason. Like there's a lot of things going on, they threw their 2 big arms. Clarke Schmidt numbers were kind of middling this year. There's reasons for hope is all I'm trying to say heading into Cleveland. Honestly, Cleveland probably should have gotten blasted out of both of those games. They didn't. They played well enough, and the Yankees didn't, there's not a juggernaut is what I'm trying to say. For as much as people want to denigrate Cleveland and, talk about, and don't get me wrong, New York has some fantastic players. They're a very good team. You don't get to where they are without being a good team, but they also had stretches this year where they struggled it looked like they weren't going to win that division. Like there is no juggernauts in baseball right now. There just isn't. This is not like a decade ago where you kind of knew who the juggernaut teams were. Right now, there is no juggernaut. I can't complete that sentence. It's a family show.
Yeah, there really isn't. The Dodgers is the closest thing to it, and
they don't have the starting pitching because of all their injuries.
That's what I was just going to say.
Oh, sorry.
Shohei Ohtani hit a home run. And I was laughing because I was watching the Dodgers. I was watching the broadcast of Game 3 for Dodgers and Mets, and they were pointing out that Shohei Ohtani has struggled with nobody on base this postseason, but his numbers with runners on base are really good. And they were saying, "What's wrong with Shohei Ohtani?" And I'm like, can you imagine like Jose Ramirez or anybody on this team? I mean, besides Lane Thomas, he seems to be the only one. Okay, well, he had, like Josh Naylor and Brian Rocchio have done great with nobody on base, but nobody else really has besides Lane Thomas. And they're talking about Ohtani doing great with runners on for the Dodgers, but terrible with nobody on. And they're acting like it's a bad thing. And I'm like, Cleveland would kill for one of these guys to come through in the middle of the order.
Common thing. It gets easier when guys on base. Like it should.
I know.
The stress is on the pitcher. It's a silly statement by the announcers.
Yeah, it was a weird stat point out. He just hit a home run with runners on. So they'll continue to point out that he hasn't done anything with nobody on. It's only with runners on. Well, Cleveland would be tied in the series at the very least if they had done things with runners on in Game 2. And that's kind of the counterpoint too. Like you're talking about how Cleveland's been in every game this series, and they have, despite their own mistakes. You could look at that from the Yankees side and say that they haven't played their best baseball either, and they're still winning. And it kind of shows you, like, if the Yankees do play better baseball, like they've never run the base as well. So, like, I don't think you're going to sit there and all of a sudden see the Yankees put on a base running clinic. But if they hit better with running, I mean, hitting with running in scoring position is always fluky, right? It's just sequencing and luck.
Yes.
If like, look again, I know someone's going to come back at me and say RBIs aren't luck. Josh Naylor had Garrett Cole had 2 hits off Garrett Cole. He has a great career off Garrett Cole. Well, guess what? His 2 hits in Game 2 came with nobody on. Is that Josh Naylor's fault? No, he didn't. He got a sac fly with runners on, so you'd love to see one of those hits happen with runners on. But he got hits off Garrett Cole. It's not his fault that the guys in front of him didn't get on base until the sac fly. Like they could have been on.
Well, it is his fault according to the people who are fans of RBIs, because when you are an RBI guy, you have a magical pull that puts guys on base no matter what. Because the good RBI guys always have a bunch of them. It's not about where they hit in the lineup. It's not about the people in front of them. It's clearly about baseball magic. And
Josh had 100 during the regular season, so like that's a good round number, and he obviously did good during the season to get to that level. So it's not like all of a sudden in the playoffs he just became bad at it, or it's all cyclical, and it's all a lot of sequencing, and
good hitters are good hitters. Just full stop.
Yes, correct. Good hitters are good hitters, and with runners on, we just talked about with Ohtani, your odds go up a little bit, but unfortunately, he got a sac fly, and that's what we talked about yesterday. Is that the Guardians' lack of power, and Josh Naylor is one of the guys who does have power. Didn't come through, and same with Jose Ramirez. The guys that do have power in this lineup did not get the big hit with runners on. They had, Josh Naylor had the sac fly, and Will Brennan doesn't have any power, but he had an RBI ground out. Like, again, you need impact hits with runners on. You cannot depend on productive outs to score runs against anybody in the playoffs, let alone the Yankees. So you could say, like, the Yankees, if they start all of a sudden playing better and hitting with runners in scoring position, that they're going to be even more dangerous. That's the scary thing. Like the Yankees have not played their best baseball. And if they start to, this could be over very quickly for Cleveland, because if these two teams are both playing at their absolute best, the Yankees are going to win. They are, plain and simple. The Guardians, though, that's the pressure point for the Guardians. Not only is they're back against the wall here because they have to win to stay in the series, but they do have to play perfect baseball. And you have to ask yourself, like, this team has done it this year. They've found ways to win with, guards ball, which includes defense and running the bases and putting the ball and pressure on the defense and coming up with the big hit and getting a lead to the bullpen. Like, that's their formula. They obviously haven't been able to do that this series, but you have to ask yourself, like, how much pressure is on them to play absolutely perfect for this to go right for them?
Does it need to be perfect, or just like, if the Yankees are perfect, you kind of need it perfect. But what we've seen in his first few games is you don't need it perfect. You just gotta be yourself to be competitive. I mean, they're competitive, but to give yourself a chance at winning, you just have to be yourself.
Maybe not throwing a rookie pitcher with one playoff appearance and no experience coming in with runners on into a jam there, who has control issues. Maybe not bringing that in.
Not do the things you didn't do in the regular season.
Yes,
I think that has been the big sticking point. Like, that is what we're seeing a lot of when things go wrong. It's when they do something that was not the approach of what they would have done in the regular season. Like, stick to what worked And not just because it's what worked, but like it's what players are used to. It's what they're kind of set up for. Like we all do jobs, we all do things in life. And when you are more used to doing something, you're more comfortable. When you're more comfortable, you perform better. I know people like they're athletes, it doesn't matter. Everyone has comfortability levels at everything. You want to put anyone in any position more at ease and make them feel more comfortable because it's going to lead to success. That's human nature.
That's exactly why, despite the fact that Jose Ramirez should hit second in a lineup, for example, but he isn't. That's the exact same thing.
100%.
The one thing I guess you can take here right now is that the Guardians all year have responded very well to these situations. Again, go back to August when they had the division lead, quote unquote tied. The Royals had the tiebreaker. They essentially were out of first place for the last time this year. They came back and they, like you said yesterday, Jeff, they separated themselves the rest of the way. And against Detroit, down 2-1, they found a way. And again, not saying that the Detroit or the Yankees are the same team as Detroit. We know they're better. We know they're more dangerous. They're going to score more runs. And in a weird way, probably have a better bullpen. They definitely have a better starting pitching staff. They've done well with their backs against the wall here. So, I mean, at the very least, I think they're going to tighten things up a little bit. And they're going to give the Yankees a game. They play well at home. If you can get a lead to your bullpen, the Guardians have an absurd record. I think they have 2 losses all season when leading after 6 innings. So if they can just get the ball to the bullpen with the lead and not be behind when the Yankees bullpen comes in, they've got a shot to win a game. And it starts from there. You win one game, you come back the next day, and you feel a little bit better because you're in the series. And there is the old adage that, a series doesn't start until a home team loses a game. Well, the Yankees didn't. The Guardians really can't afford to lose at home. You don't want to have to go to New York, have to win 2 to win this series. But I don't know, winning all 3 at home seems like a tall task, especially considering they have no idea who the starters are going to be in Game 4 and Game 5, which we're going to get into in the second and third segments. We'll talk about the guy who was supposed to be the Game 5 starter, and we will get into the Game 3 starter and the rest of the series in segment 3, all coming up.
Let's talk about the good people over at Prize Picks. I mentioned on yesterday's show, right now, they're doing one of their special deals. And I just want to double check that I understood it correctly, that, Anthony Edwards is the Ant, as I believe he's called in the NBA, has to score 1 point. This is a player who I think was a contender for the scoring title. I'm not always the most in-depth basketball guy, but in 6 days and 23 hours, if he scores 1 point against the Lakers, Tuesday at 9 p.m., you win. And that means you just need one other stat category and that day, and you've got to win. You just have to go through and see what works. And it's as simple as more or less. And things like points. I see here, if I'm like just looking at the NBA, because that'll be what's in, you can do, those are the popular ones. But right now it's mostly points, looking that far into the future. But they do all sorts of deals like that all the time over at Prize Picks. They have goblins, they have demons, ways to earn extra money. They have flex with their wins. You don't have to hit on all 6 when you pick stat categories. And right now, if you head over to Prize Picks, use the app or go to the website, use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB, and you get $50 instantly when you play 5. That's free money. Again, that is code LOCKEDONMLB in the app or at the website to get $50 instantly when you play 5. Prize Picks, run your game.
All of the postseason action, you can hear more about it on Locked On MLB with our pal Sully. Mets, Dodgers. He'll have Guardians and Yankees as well. And any postseason storylines, any upcoming offseason storylines. I know he's probably talking about the situation in Oakland. He's probably talking about the situation in Tampa Bay, which is really sad and crazy. Honestly, I'm sure he's got a lot of that covered. It's always good at those things. And he also has always great trivia questions. So I recommend, if you're a baseball fan, checking out Locked On MLB for a funny and usually a unique perspective on all things Major League Baseball with our pal Sully, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we get into Game 3, let's talk about the guy who was supposed to start in Game 5, whose season is over, definitely more than likely his Guardians career. And, well, I shouldn't say that. I would say Alex Cobb's career might be over. He turned 37 a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. He's got multiple injuries here. Maybe he wants to go on his own terms. Maybe he tries to sign another deal next year, and maybe he wants to play for Stephen Vogt. He talked about him and Craig Albanez as teammates and coaches in San Francisco. So maybe he wants to come back and do so. I don't know if it'll be here or wherever, but I can understand a guy wanting to go on his own terms. So we'll see. But I think today's the day to look at the Alex Cobb trade for the Guardians and ask, did this really go the way they wanted? And obviously it didn't. They took a risk on a guy who they thought was coming back off of an injury and was ready to go and was, beset by injury after injury at this point. It was a failed gamble. They tried to, hit on 11 and they went over, I would say here. It's not a very good idea to hit on 11 in blackjack. And I feel like that's kind of what they did here. Like I shouldn't say that. Like maybe they just hit too many times. I don't know. I think Alex Cobb, I know, Jeff, your argument is the trade deadline was bad. It was bad, but go look at the teams who made big swings at the deadline. They weren't going to get Jack Flaherty, but there were other things you could have done out there. Other teams that did better.
I mean, I don't think you're getting Eflin either, because Florida was going for. You look at they got Connor Norby in that deal. Like Cleveland didn't have the equivalent of that. Like you weren't going to get Eflin because that they got multiple pieces that they could use now and in the guys ready to go. Like they're. Yeah, it's I don't or was it unless let me double check that actually, just in case.
Either way, I think if you look at all the guys who were traded this offseason or this deadline, the two guys that were really available that could have worked for Cleveland were either Kikuchi or Eflin.
So that Kikuchi, was
we were a little
Baumeister and Horvath, a recent second round pick, and a pretty interesting mid rotation back end starter.
And Norby?
No, Norby. I was wrong. I realized after I said it that Norby might have been the Trevor Rogers deal.
We talked about how a lot of that was predicated on salary, obviously. So that factors into this, that the Orioles picked up Eflin's salary for next year. Eflin was the guy to get, though. I guess if it wasn't Eflin, it was Kikuchi. Kikuchi we had some concerns about in terms of his second half performance, but he was doing better. And we thought at the time the Astros gave up a lot. And I don't think that they did give up a lot in retrospect. Could have been a lot worse. And Kikuchi was really good for them down the stretch. I think the hindsight of 2020 here is the Matthew Boyd thing worked out. He pitched well for them down the stretch. He had a couple of good innings in the ALDS. We'll see what he does in game 3 today. That was just fine and dandy, but the Guardians knew this rotation needed something. You needed to trade somebody you could count on to start a playoff game, because that's what this rotation needed. You were hoping for Tanner, and you were assuming the way things were going with Boyd, you were going to go there.
Well, at that time, you didn't really know Boyd. Boyd was still.
That's true. You did not. So
this was all a dart. You were hoping Tanner
throw. Yeah,
it was multiple.
Else.
Yeah, it was
Lively.
Well, you're kind of hoping that Williams was going to get it together, at that point.
But at that point, he was still an unknown, because at that time he was still coming back from his injury. So
100%.
The only guy you had in the rotation was Tanner. So I think with the looking back on it now with another perspective, is that this team, it was a worthwhile gamble. I think I said this at the time too. I was fine with the Cobb deal if it wasn't the only thing they did. They had to go out and add another starter besides Cobb. I know nothing else got done besides Eflin and Kikuchi, and they weren't getting Jack Flaherty. So I'm not even going to look at that one. That was never going to happen. But
I think that's why they got Boyd. I think this was 100% the approach, was they took a bunch of dart throws.
But he was a wild card too. Boyd was a wild card too.
It was all dart throws. They took because the deadline was poor, and we talk about Eflin. Eflin also, I just double checked it there. It was 2 recent second round picks. In Tampa had those guys got it pretty heavily. So it was actually a pretty high cost. Not that Cleveland should be afraid to pay a high cost, but Cleveland also has a weird minor leagues where they don't have a lot of guys in the upper minors at the time of the deadline. We were talking about how they kind of lacked some stellar trade pieces. Kind of the in-between level, because there was no stars traded. It was one of the worst deadlines in recent memory. So you're looking at, Eflin. I don't even know how he pitched in the postseason. I'd have to go look and see.
He had one start. He gave up 1 run in 4 innings, so he pitched well. The Orioles were out because of their offense. Yeah. I mean, you can't compare the trades either, though, because whatever Miami wanted for or whatever Tampa Bay wanted for Eflin for Baltimore was probably different what they wanted from Cleveland. Like the players are different. Just because you don't have the equivalent of whatever Baltimore gave up doesn't mean that Tampa Bay wasn't like, well, we like all these players. Like they still could have gotten a deal done. It just would have looked different. I think,
or could they? I mean, that might have been the guys they liked. That's it. Like that's always the sometimes I see the illogical.
That does happen.
Well, sometimes like. Matthew, maybe there's something they really
Oakland.
like, there's
Oakland and the Murphy trades and the Olsen trade. That does happen too. But I think, again, with the retrospect of hindsight here, and like I said, at the time I said I would have liked the Cobb deal if they had done more, not just Matthew Boyd, because we both said Matthew Boyd was kind of found money if it worked out, and it did. So that should have been found money. But at the time of this trade, the only guy you really were sure of was Tanner, and you were like, well, hopefully Gavin comes back and he looks good, and then you were going to trade. Like, and I know people chided me for this a little bit when I said it, but I still stand by it. No starter at the deadline that has the upside of Gavin Williams was traded. Like Jack Flaherty is about as close as it gets. So maybe you could say those two are on par, but the thing is, Cleveland was never going to get Jack Flaherty.
No.
And Gavin showed flashes of that, and he showed flashes of where he missed half a season and is still a second-year pitcher. So he's still very inconsistent. So yes, you didn't get a starter better than him because of the upside, but you probably could have got a starter better than what he showed you in Eflin or Kikuchi. And I think that's the failure for this team is they knew they needed starting pitching. They knew they needed starting pitching very badly. You knew you needed to trade for someone you could count on to make a playoff start. And I think trading for someone with the injuries of Alex Cobb and his age was probably the wrong thing to bank on. Considering, again, like I said, if you did something else, like say you went out and got Eflin and
they
Cobb,
did Boyd. Like Boyd was the something else.
Count. That does not.
It
count.
does. It's 100%. That is adding to the roster. They did a dart throw approach. They went bulk instead of one. It's part of the deadline.
I'm talking about an actual starter that you could count on. Matthew Boyd was not a guy you knew what was going to do. He was coming off Tommy John a year removed. You did not know what he was going to be.
No,
I said that was found money. I'm talking about an Eflin and Kikuchi, and Eflin should have been the move. Kikuchi should have been the move. You could do Cobb in one of those, and that would have been fine, and said, okay, we took a gamble on a Cobb. Because, again, you had Tanner and maybe Ben Lively, and they trusted Ben Lively so little at the end of the year, they didn't even put him on the first two rosters over Cobb, who is now done. They failed at the deadline in terms of pitching. They failed. They took a gamble, and it didn't. And they could have gotten two other pitchers. They should have done it because they knew they needed the starters.
I think it's a small bit of false equivalency.
It's an F.
It's a small bit of false equivalency because again, we don't know if they could have gotten those guys, those teams. Like, and here's the thing: at the time, Kikuchi was terrible. Neither you nor I wanted to trade for him. So like, it's kind of to go back and be like, oh, they should have gotten him when you were both and I were like, he is cooked right now. Like we didn't want, like, you can't say that it's like, oh, they should have gotten him. Cause if you go back and listen to our podcast at that time, we were both like, don't trade for Kikuchi. He's imploding. And then if you look at Eflin, there was like, there was a degree of trying to get him, but I don't know again, because the other thing, the bonus here is if you're Tampa is they probably got a higher price than they'd get from anywhere else by trading in division. For some teams, that's a bonus. Like you're going to get more. So like, I think,
Baltimore also took money. That's the thing, too. Baltimore took on money in that deal, which was important for Tampa.
Which was important. And I don't know if Cleveland
was going to do
especially with the TV stuff. I just think like they took a lot of gambles. And I would have liked something more, more defined. But that was kind of like the guy I kind of wanted. And I don't think he did much was Mike Lorenzen because he went for almost nothing and was cheap. Like, like that's where I would go. Like for me, like the higher end guys, like go look at the numbers because I'll say that's the thing. Like the Astros did great work with Kikuchi. Like the Astros are and maybe Cleveland would have too. Like, Cleveland, Houston, Milwaukee, Tampa, these are the elite teams at pitching refinements. So, there's that of it. But I think it was such a hard deadline. And I don't, Cobb, it blew up in their face. They gambled. Their whole deadline was a gamble, right? Like Lane Thomas was hurt most of the year and was nowhere near as effective as the year before. Matt Boyd was rolling it out. Even like their minor moves, the guys like Carrasco and stuff like that. This is a team that gambled heavily and just kept gambling. They kept hitting on 16? Is that like, and eventually, this time they busted out a few of the other ones that worked. But, they instead of chasing
Probably
unicorns, they
hitting
were
on
chasing.
12 is what I should have said. Not
Is that
11, 12,
I don't
no.
know. Is it
Yeah.
like double
It's
down
12.
on 12?
It's 12.
I don't know. The rules.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the rules, but I don't know the exact lingo. But it's like they gambled all year round, and I mean, I agree. This one blew up. It didn't work. Like three, maybe 4 starts. You needed more, and they didn't get that. I agree with you totally on that. I don't know what the right answer. I think where I also agree with you is that idea that they should have tried more. They should have thrown more instead of. They did throw a Boyd and they threw a Cobb, but they probably should have, like I said, tried to get a Lorenzen, tried to get 4 of those guys. Like, bring the thing together and see what you can get.
Yeah, and the other thing with Eflin too, I know what you're saying is try to play Moneyball and recreate a picture in the aggregate. I don't know if that.
Yeah,
can work out.
I mean that's kind of like what they tried to do.
It is.
And I'll say, like, starting pitching,
they should have supplemented. Yeah,
starting pitching has not been weirdly the killer for them in all of this. Like all the
but
issues.
Now it is. I know it's the lack of situational hitting right now, but nothing. If Tanner doesn't get through the second inning, and I mean, there were some comments on our show saying that, or I saw a tweet saying, "Why didn't you guys talk more about Tanner not getting out of the second inning?" And because he said he's a friend of the show, and he is a friend of the show. But here's the thing. All the things we've said about Tanner in the positive light, we would be saying about him whether or not he's been on the show before, because he's one of the players you and I have watched the most over the last couple of years, and
I've also been quick to point out, like, sometimes he gets too amped up. Like I talked about that in the earlier series with Detroit. Like I don't pull the punch just because he's been a friend.
And he didn't get out of the second inning. There were things that didn't go his way, and there's still some room to grow there, including this. So. Yeah, that's not really the issue here. But, the only guy they had, and if Tanner doesn't do well in the postseason, no matter who they acquire, doesn't matter, because unfortunately Tanner has been thrust into the ace role. He has to be the guy, and it's a lot to ask. And he was pretty good in game 1 of the ALDS, and he's been not at his best since then. I think he'd say the same thing. He hasn't been at his best since then. And I still think there's still a chance he comes back and looks better than this. But the thing with Eflin too, not to beleaguer this any longer, because we have to get to a break and get to our final segment, but Eflin has a contract for next year. You can either go out and trade him in the offseason if you don't want to pay him next year, or you look at Bieber's off the books and you have no idea who's in your rotation next year besides Tanner, because Logan Allen and Tristan McKenzie are wild cards. You have Gavin Williams. You got nobody else. You don't know who's going to be in the rotation next year. So Eflin could have been a piece for next year too, or you could swap if you don't want to pay him. But for this year, that was a guy I think they needed to add, or like you said, Lorenzen, something else. They should have taken more cracks at the ball on that one. All right, we'll come back and talk about game 3 and how the Guardians might fare in that one. Guys, sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously. You always want to be ready for peak performance. Hims provides access to treatments that can help you rise to the occasion, giving you that boost of confidence so you can be ready and stay ready whenever the mood strikes. All you have to do is answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable, compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation or healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Check out all the postseason action on your SiriusXM app. Just search Guardians to find that broadcast. Yankees, if you're so inclined. Mets, Dodgers, all that good stuff. And I think you could find our podcast on SiriusXM.
Okay, so one last final point. I'll say with all of this stuff, I think that maybe the biggest indictment isn't on Cobb or anyone else. It might be on Gavin Williams, who they haven't even used, right? Like that's when you get down to it, it's like the fact that he hasn't appeared in any form. That might be the biggest question right now, is like exactly what's there.
Yeah, that's a very weird. We've done at least 3 episodes. We're like, hey, is today the day that Gavin Williams makes an impact?
And the answer's always been no.
I know.
It's kind of weird. No, it's kind of weird at this point. Like, are we sure that they're not weekend at Bernieing him? Am I going to get in trouble for making that joke? I mean, I hope he's fine and healthy. I'll go back to like when I saw him in person here in Milwaukee, and like he seemed to not know why his stuff wasn't working. And that's kind of a scary thing to hear a guy talk about in that moment. So I don't know. We saw the ups and downs. There are points where he was just filthy and points where he was filthy in a different way. But yeah, that might be kind of the big, like, what, like, yeah.
That's a great question. I assume he's going to start game 4, which will be Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
If he starts game 4, it's going to be
a
like
month rest.
Yeah, it's going to be 28 days since he pitched in an actual game that counted. He was supposed to go out of the bullpen in the final day of the regular season, and that got rained out, and then they just never used him in the first round, and now here they are. And he might be starting what could be a must-win game. If the Guardians don't win today in game 3, then you're starting a guy. It's the same as Alex Cobb in game 3 in Detroit, right? You were kind of starting a guy that might have been playing a must-win. Very, very strange situation. I don't know. We were going to talk too about this. Maybe we'll have to save this, but we're talking about like the worst trade deadline. We were looking at all this research about what the Cleveland teams have passed have done at the trade deadline. We looked at like, Jeff Juden and Steve Woodard and Jason Beret and John Smiley, and we looked at Ubaldo Jimenez, and I'm thinking, okay, real quick, Alex Cobb is one of the worst trade acquisitions among pitchers in team history, like short of John Smiley and Beret and Woodard, because
those all cost more. I'll say, in fairness to him, each one of those was like, I like Bresnahan, but like it's going to be still a long road for him to be a major leaguer. Like all those other trades cost him at least one major leaguer. Like Steve Klein was a good pitcher for a while, and
it was a different
Damian Jackson and Danny Graves. Like those were costly. Richie Sexton, like those are all super good. Like Jimenez, at least Pomeranz had half a decade as reliever. Like,
yeah. Well, you needed Alex Cobb to be Ubaldo Jimenez in this trade, and he was John Smiley. Unfortunately, that's what he was. He was John Smiley.
He was.
This is one of the worst deadline moves Cleveland's ever made in terms of just the acquired player. Yeah, we'll see about Bresnahan, but all right, game 3. So it's officially Matt Boyd versus Clarke Schmidt. Clarke Schmidt's having a pretty good year and has a pitch mix that, quite frankly, Cleveland just does not do well against. Yeah. He's got a very, very cutter sweeper heavy approach. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Michael King, who has thrived with San Diego, who crushed the Guardians back in July or August, whatever it was, around the deadline. It was after the
All-Star break. Dodgers in the postseason too, right?
He sure did. Yeah, he had a great series out there. He just didn't work out. Cutter heavy. Quan hits cutters well. Nobody else hits cutters well on this team. So expect to see a lot of cutters against this Guardians lineup.
Yeah.
I don't think, even Kyle Manzardo doesn't have enough data to even qualify against cutters. So we have no idea how he's going to look. But hey, Kyle Manzardo is going to have at least 3-4 at bats, 6 at bats over the next 2 days. It's one of the most he's ever gotten, because you're going to have Luis Gil and Clarke Schmidt. So you could probably guarantee he's going to at least 4 or 5 at bats the next 2 days. Maybe that's a good thing. The other thing Clarke Schmidt does well is sweepers. Cleveland against sweepers, also not great. Yeah, it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough. So Guardians gonna have their work cut out for them. Stephen Kwan again hits sweepers pretty well, and that's about it. So
yeah, that's why I was like, if you go back and listen to it, or game 1, I was kind of surprised they weren't starting him, just because the pitch mix is not an ideal matchup for Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
It's cutter, sweeper, and sinker, and they're bad against all 3 as a team. Now he does use his curve quite a bit, and they're pretty good against the curve. So you're kind of hoping that he's gonna, maybe you can make him go to that pitch. But his breaking ball value on Baseball Savant is like through the roof. Like that's like his sweeper is phenomenal. So with Cleveland being
still got a plus.
Yeah, it's good too. It's his second best graded pitch, but that sweeper is. Cleveland's going to see so much sweeper, and his cutter is highly graded as well. So, just they know. Like, what was it when they pitch hit for David Fry? They sent out the bullpen coach to immediately go out and remind, what is the pitch to throw? Like all this stuff that we get into, that minutia is why that happens and why we bring it up.
Yeah. There's a deeper conversation to be had about why hitting is harder in the postseason. We won't get into that today because I think it requires a deeper conversation. For Matthew Boyd, all year he's relied on the fastball and the changeup. This is a very good fastball hitting Yankee team. The only guy that he really gets out with a fastball on this team is probably going to be Volpe. And oddly enough, Stanton does not do well against lefty fastballs. So maybe that's something. But the one advantage you do have is it's a lefty versus Juan Soto. And Juan Soto is still a superhuman. The platoon advantage matters a little bit. And Juan Soto has not had great luck this year against sliders. I will say batted ball data says that he has gotten unlucky, that he's not good. Not that he's not good against sliders, but he's gotten unlucky against them. So that's a dangerous territory. Aaron Judge does very poorly against left-handed sliders. And I believe he also does very poorly against left-handed. Nope. He does well against left-handed changeups. Never mind. So there's that. It's going to be the same, though, as the rest of the series. Cleveland's got to play a clean game. They have to get a lead before, get a lead of the sixth inning there. They have to limit the damage at the bottom of the order. You can't keep letting Rizzo and Verdugo and Volpe beat 100%. You because you can't be facing Gleyber Torres and Soto and Judge with runners on all the time. You can survive a solo home run from Soto or Judge. You cannot survive it when there's 2 or 3 runners on. You can't survive them loading the bases and just even giving up sac flies and doubles. Like, you got to get the bottom of the order out. You got to play a clean game, and Cleveland just needs some situational hitting. That's the bottom line too. Is you've got to get guys up with runners on, and they've got to come through. And that's going to be on Jose. It's going to be on Josh, and it's going to be on Lane Thomas again. If Rocchio, Kwan, and hopefully Manzardo get it going. The top, I will say this: the 9-1, because of how Rocchio's played, I feel confident in him. Oddly enough, that's a very weird thing to say, right? The 9 through 5 part of this order, you feel really good about. They've done, all of these guys have either done well or are capable of doing well. It's kind of the Jimenez, Naylor, everybody else, whoever plays right field, that you don't feel great about. But again, it's all about getting hits at the right time, and that's all what's going to come down to.
Yeah,
it's anything crazy. No rocket science here.
I agree. It's definitely needing this team to find that timely hit. They did one thing I asked for, which was those productive outs. But let's now start the next step, which is getting productive outs and then, turning that into more runs, because you need now to start taking runners in scoring positions. One thing when you're facing Detroit, who had 2 really good hitters and then a lot of guys who were, like Cleveland, average to below average. New York's got 2 of the 3 best hitters on the planet, and then some other guys who are really solid, at least against one way of the platoon or another. They just not as many soft spots. So you need more than 2 or 3 or probably even 4. And that's why they got to start putting things together.
We'll be back with you on Thursday, hopefully recapping a Guardians Game 3 win and looking ahead to Game 4 to a pitcher who hasn't pitched in a month versus Luisio, who at least is a rookie, although he's really good. So yeah.
There's some things in there. We'll hopefully get a chance to talk positively and talk about why maybe they'll have a chance, even though velocity has not been their thing this year. There's some stuff to talk about for sure. Just like there's always things to talk about when it comes to this team. It has been a fun team all year. I look forward to tomorrow's game when I'm not in the middle of parent-teacher conferences. Thank you all for joining us, and go Guardians, go!